If you pick an unfalsifiable belief, by unfalsifiable, I mean a belief which cannot be shown to be false, something that is immune to disconfirmation, you're safe. Nobody can ever prove you wrong.
Hello, welcome once again to Justified Nonetheless. I am Kevin Berger, and I apply the principles of polemics and skepticism to atheism and the claims made by atheists. R. and Rod did such a fantastic job illustrating why the exact same rationale that atheists used for not being convinced of the existence of any deity, if applied to non-belief, renders it as absurd special pleading, given that there is no empirical evidence to substantiate the claimed distinction between not believing in any deity and believing that there are none, that I decided I would let Matt Dillahunty demonstrate why the arguments that I continue to hear from atheists in favor of non-belief are just as fallacious in that context as when they're applied for arguments for the existence of a deity. So let's hear what Matt has to say.
Claims aren't evidence. The claim itself under question is not evidence for the claim under question.
This is the word game you're talking about. And it's just funny because somebody's like, oh, if we call it then something has been called
non-belief.
Anecdotal and testimonial evidence are only good enough at expanding about things that we already know. They're not good for demonstrating the truth of something for which we have no empirical evidence. Now, the original versions, depending on who you see talking about it or translating it, might alternate back and forth between the word conceive and the word imagine. I don't find that to be remotely relevant. We're asking someone to conceive of something. We are asking someone to imagine in either situation. Now, can I actually imagine
non-belief?
Because that's what we're talking about. In the ontological argument, but can we actually properly imagine
non-belief?
Now, we can certainly imagine the abstract concept of
non-belief.
We can imagine some idealized thing, but we can't fully actually understand it. So at the beginning, when you're asked to conceive of something you can't quite really do, and therefore by definition exists. And I say by definition because that is probably the single most important thing about ontological arguments. We are defining something with peculiarities of language.
Lack of belief, absence of belief, non-belief, unbelief.
That imply existence in one way or another. I'm free to believe that whatever you tell me is your best explanation of what you think you experienced, but it isn't confirmation that
non-belief
exists.
Once again, I am confident that everyone will forgive me for dubbing over Matt because, again, the point should be obvious to anyone exercising a modicum of intellectual honesty. Appeals to definition and personal anecdotes, conceptual and ontological fallacies, and the like no more substantiate the existence of a mental state, the neurological distinction between not believing in deities and believing there are none, than it substantiates the existence of any deity. Either a thing exists or it doesn't. If it does, there should be evidence of its existence, whether it's a deity or a neurological distinction. And if one insists on empirical evidence for the former, then to be logically consistent, one is obliged to apply the same standard for the latter. And no, the gumball fallacy does not get you there, because the gumball fallacy never approaches demonstrating an absence of belief. Does it demonstrate withholding judgment? Yes. That substantiates agnosticism, which no one is disputing. If when asked if you believe there is an even or an odd number of gumballs, your response is, I don't know. While true, that's a different answer to a question that wasn't asked. You've conflated belief with knowledge. You haven't been asked what you know, you've been asked what you believe, and not knowing doesn't preclude belief. If in the circumstances you say, just because I don't believe there is an even number of gumballs doesn't mean I am claiming there's an odd number of gumballs. You've instead conflated a belief statement with a knowledge claim, and not asserting that there is an odd number doesn't preclude belief to that effect either. If in this situation Your response is, I have no good reason to believe one way or the other. You have just committed an ought-is fallacy. And just because you shouldn't believe one way or the other does not preclude belief. If in this situation your response is, I want to believe as many true things and not believe as many untrue things as possible, because belief isn't a choice, your desire isn't relevant, and that doesn't preclude belief either. Nothing about the gumball fallacy demonstrates either the absence of belief or the possibility of the absence of belief. Appeals to definition and personal anecdotes, conceptual and ontological fallacies, and faulty analogies do not substantiate the claimed neurological distinction between not believing a claim and believing the negation of that claim, any more than they substantiate the existence of a deity or anything else for that matter. You know what would? Empirical evidence. I haven't seen any yet. I don't expect I ever will. I'm convinced that I won't, and the more discussions I have with atheists who insist that this distinction exists in reality without providing empirical evidence to support it, the more convinced that I am that it's just a framework to eschew the need to justify anything. And no, leaving the claim implicit does not absolve one of the burden of proof. So until next time, even if your beliefs may not necessarily be true, they should be justified nonetheless.